Hey Jay, how you doing?
Hey, good, David. How are you?
Good. Is my audio okay?
The audio is perfect. Yeah. What am I looking at on what instrument is it like a bouzouki on the corner? Or
Uh, no, it is a flatback mandola.
okay.
Uh, I just left my bouzouki in to have I was custom made for me in Ireland, and one bad weather thing here and couldn't get any sound past. I think the frets came up and a whole bunch of stuff. So I left it in yesterday. Actually, it's so funny. I left in a banjo and a cheater's banjo. You know the six string versions that
Yeah.
do and the bouzouki. I gotta love my people. You know the bouzouki is as Greek is, and there's now a thing called the Irish bouzouki, which
Mhm.
is the flatback bouzouki, which was developed because all the Irish guys in the pubs couldn't keep the thing from slipping off their groin. You know?
Okay. So out of necessity almost.
Out of necessity, they came up with this other instrument. But you see the L5 there. So,
I do. Yep.
then my other ones are in the case from just having done a weekend of gigs. So, that's it.
Yeah. No, it gets crazy. I got.
Oh yeah, I know you.
It's like out of control sometimes.
Look, some good-looking babies up there.
There are, and I wish I could say this was it, but it's not. There are a bunch in the case too. But my wife doesn't need to know about that, right?
Just, do you ever see those memes about if I die, please don't let my wife sell the guitars for what I told her I paid for them.
Yes, that's my favorite one. And luckily she doesn't listen to my podcast, so she won't. All right, let's do the thing, man. I want to welcome David O'Rourke to the Jazz Real Book. It's really nice to have you, Dave, as a
Oh,
guest.
thank you for having me, Jay. I've been enjoying, I told you off camera a few weeks back. I actually enjoy a lot of the interviews that you've done because there's something about musician to musician interview. It doesn't necessarily have to geek out, but you know the questions to ask that a generic interviewer is not going to touch on, you know.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I do try. Yeah, it's like a conversation between two musicians, which is such an organic thing. And I could tell a lot of times, like when I get a subject, especially someone of high notoriety, it takes them a second to be like, oh, this might be something a little bit different, which is the hope. I don't know, but it's fun regardless. I'm enjoying doing this, and you've been a great supporter, and I appreciate that as well. Thank you
Oh, thank you.
for
No,
your
it's
kind
it's
words.
really I encourage anyone, including the ones on the specific songs of the real book, because you know what I think about that is that we all own the real book, but there are tunes that we just never addressed in
Yeah,
the and it was such a there's some standards, there's stuff written by the famous jazz musicians, and some of that, Falling Grace became famous, I think, out of the real book. Then people went and checked out
yeah, yeah.
the
That's so
recording.
true. I mean, even Desert Air was one of my last show, and like I've never played Desert Air, I've heard it on Crystal Silence album, but yeah, it's pretty interesting to think like who actually who programmed that book or who chose the tunes because some are so standard and others are like I'm discovering this almost for the first time, which is great. But yeah, so like obviously we know each other, but I don't know a whole lot about you and your history to be quite honest, except that I just did some research. So if we could maybe just sort of start, well, actually, let me begin with this. Are there any projects you're currently promoting or working on that you'd like people to know about?
Um, am I really working on something that we're in the early fundraising stages for a project next year with Cassandra Wilson and Symphony Orchestra for late fall. Uh, what actual form it's going to end up taking, I don't even know myself, and the reason I don't is down to her creativity. Actually, it's an amazing collaboration because you get used to. if you're in the role of arranger, it can take, many forms. Somebody will go, I need arrangements for this, and they'll often say, do your thing. And I'll say to somebody like that, I know you probably think you mean that, but I need to know really why you picked certain songs. In some cases, it might be a simple answer like, well, I just like the sound of it and the melody stayed in my head. Then you'll hear some story from somebody about, I chose it because of blah, 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 and it was a very important time in my life. And now something, it's like a bell goes off for me then. I know what I'm going to be able to do. So you go away and you write and you come back hoping that it's what they want. Uh, but then there's a different type, there's a real collaboration. And with somebody like Cassandra, a lot of people wouldn't know, but she could sit down and write a score.
Oh, really?
She has that kind of man. So a lot of she's thrown a few grooves at me that are, so it's like little bits. This is what I'm thinking, and and sometimes she might pull it back and maybe change something, but she's constantly she's constantly thinking about it 24/7 about music uh, and I really I connect very well with people who go that deep, in the emotional side of it as well.
Right, right. I mean, so I'm assuming that's somebody you've worked with before, Cassandra.
Um, I did a tour more on guitar. We were going to do a recording in Ireland that didn't play out, but we ended up touring. And but my history with her is kind of very interesting because I met her in 1991 before her Blue Light Till Dawn was recorded, and this part of the story doesn't make me look particularly good, so I have to tell it in the interest of true transparency. But when you hear it out, you'll understand why I gave the answer I did. Um, I met her in Bradley's late one night. I was with a friend of mine, Hugh Buckley, a guitar player from Ireland, who had just landed that day. And to my left in Bradley's was Cassandra Wilson, Vanessa Rubin, and I think Jackie McGovern was her name, this great piano player. She was a school teacher from Detroit, and they would all gone to her gig
Hmm.
to support her. And I got talking with Cassandra that night, and she turned around and she said, I have a project coming up. Do you play slide guitar? And I had done. I never really focused. My brother was a blues guitar player, so he had when I was about 8 years of age, he played me. I just remember him talking about Robert Johnson when I was in 1968, and I was a kid. So things like that stay with you. But here's somebody who I had in my record collection asking me if I play slide guitar, and my
Hmm.
response was, you know what? There's people who specialize in that. You might be better talking
Yeah.
to them. Years later, 2016, we're playing a gig in the Irish Arts Centre, and she introduces me. She said, I asked him to play on my Blue Light Till Dawn record, and he turned me down.
Oh, well, it was for that record too. Okay.
And yeah, I know, but I'm looking at the audience, and there's a lady about 3 rows back looking at me going, how could you? You know, and the thing was, if you listen to what was done in that record, I've said this to her several times, you wouldn't have gotten that out of me. And but this will tell you a little bit about her. Her vibe is no, but I would have gotten something. She didn't say just as good, but something maybe as important and different. So it kind of tells you how she thinks as an artist about it. And the fact that we've remained connected, like I didn't talk to her for many years because she was off doing her thing, but I just think it's very interesting how the circular aspect of it moves. So that would be the bigger long-term project. Meanwhile, the movie Sinners coming out has generated a bunch of gigs for me playing slide guitar and
Right,
and she told me to go see that movie actually when it came out. You need to go and then call me after you get out.
right.
So
Yeah.
I'm playing in the Butcher Block in Long Branch
Okay. Yeah.
on a blues gig with more acoustic blues like Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, and that, and I'm loving it. You know,
Yeah. I mean, that's a very specific skill, for those who aren't familiar with slide guitar. Um, and I guess I don't know if there's really an anecdote in there. Like, it's an interesting thing because, like, is it better to say, yes, I do it and figure it out? Or is it just better to be honest and be like, yes, there's people who specialize in slide guitar. And of course, that record. I forget who played on that slide, but
So there's a bunch of guitar players involved with there's Marvin Sewell came later, who's a wonderful guitar player, and then it was Brandon Ross and Kevin Bright, I believe, and Craig, was it Craig Street?
there's so
I
many
don't know whether
different.
he was the producer or but I I know one thing that had I got into the studio now I would have started listening like crazy between now. By the way, for everyone else, that became the biggest selling record on Blue Note for a number of years. So I have a history of I told Adam Clayton from U2 when we were 18. I said my punchline in a musical argument with him was, "With your attitude, you'll never make it."
Yeah, he's, he's done
So
he's done terribly for himself.
yes, Naomi Campbell, and
Wow.
but no, you know what? Probably the wiser thing for me would have been, it's so easy to rewrite history, but had I said yes and gone forward with it, can you imagine what I would have learned at that time about, because she draws out of people what it's not just what she wants to hear, but she wants to hear what they're bringing to the table. And if I may just say this about, I ended up working with Marvin Sewell and Brandon Ross with her, and I remember at one point I took this to my heart. It was so kind of them to say it. They said, "David, you're so easy to play with," because we're talking about that two guitar thing. And I said, "You know why? Because you're doing the heavy lifting. I'm noodling around." Uh, but I suppose it's working with a lot of singers, and you'll experience this too, right? That some people know how to when to move in with something and when to pull back and accept the fact that you're going to step on each other. It's part of life. Conversations are not linear, right? They're not boom, stop, now you speak. Um, but I would have probably learned a whole lot from it. However, the universe or whatever people, it was not meant to be, right? That's the,
Sure. Yeah.
uh,
I mean, meanwhile, she produced an amazing record. You've had an amazing career, so you know,
yeah,
things worked out, I guess, right? Cool. So, all right. So you knew Adam Clay. All right. So let's talk about your upbringing, if we could, because seems like an interesting one. Uh, Born in Ireland. Uh,
yeah.
where in Ireland were you born?
So just outside Dublin, it's a village called Malahide, which is accepting global warming and all that now because they have great weather now. But if we had the kind of weather you have here, it would have been like the Jersey Shore because
Hmm.
our town was invaded by beachgoers when we were lucky to get some real summer weather. So we were right on the water in an old Victorian house that my father had insisted to my mother that we buy, having just moved into a more modern house that had all the appliances. Now we're slumming it with no money in this marvelous piece of architecture where we ended up just being able to convert the bottom floor for like a kitchen and dining room. But upstairs, this will give you with no money, we had a baby grand piano, state-of-the-art hi-fi system, which kind of tells you
Priorities.
I grew up listening on the make was quad. Ask Billy Drummond about. He has a coffee table book on quad sound
Okay.
system, and I heard the best of music of so many different genres on vinyl in that room, and I remember all of it, and it impacts everything I do to this day. Everything I heard that was played for me.
Wow. So
And my
parents,
dad and three older brothers.
okay, all musicians or just music
The second oldest who passed away a couple of years ago, Michael, he was a very natural musician, and I see my daughter like this too. I'm the needle drop guy when I'm, much to the chagrin of my father, trying to learn a phrase. I'm going back and forth before I got his reel-to-reel tape.
Right.
Kids don't realize how lucky they are now with slow downer and all that, but we had a choice, an octave lower at half speed and our thing was running at incorrect speed, so it was a major seventh lower, which I was learning in two keys, which is okay on guitar for some things where you move up and down a fret, but that might have helped in my development. But it was my oldest brother and my daughter have this thing where it's like a photographic memory, an audio version of that, where they hear something and they're working off their memory of it. So she won't get it fully correct the first time. And then a few days later, I haven't heard her listening to it at all anywhere, or AirPods or not. She's working the stuff out herself. And my brother was that guy, never played piano again, sits down, he's playing the Stevie Winwood part of John Barleycorn Must Die album. And I'm going,
Mm.
where'd you learn that? He just did it. And I'm fascinated. I'm not like that. I
Right.
had I had good, really strong relative pitch apparently from the get-go. And I was never away from an instrument. So I kind of feel like I'm the guy with this type of whatever talent who worked at it.
Mhm.
And my brother didn't, life took him a different direction. I often wonder what kind of a musician he would have been because his ability to absorb,
Right.
was it was fascinating. My oldest brother was a fan of the Rolling Stones and the Beach Boys. Michael was the Beatles, and they were a year apart, never fought. They had playful arguments about Beatles versus the Stones.
Who doesn't?
Next brother was folk music and traditional Irish. Then my
Right.
dad was, he hated the sound of a processed electric guitar. Pedals would be evil to him if he knew what they did. Uh, but he introduced me to so much music from Oscar Peterson, Errol Garner, Mahalia Jackson when I was in single digits. And I didn't understand a lot of it. I remember Oscar Peterson just sounded like notes flying past me, but I
Yeah.
knew there was something more than just kind of playing scales. He had Cannonball Adderley's, I think was it Live at the Lighthouse album.
Sure.
Uh, so I never knew why he would have just randomly read about something or picked up something, but he played stuff for me and explained to me the African American experience to a young child that stuck with me. So I knew the music meant more than just notes, chords, and beat divisions, that there was historical meaning behind it that impacted on
Yeah.
a lot of different levels. So that was my early years, I suppose. And I took piano lessons when I was 9 and hated it when I found out I had to miss soccer games because of it. I thought you just show up and they show you what, you know, the teacher shows you, and then you come back a week later. I didn't realize this practice thing
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
so years later, of course, I had regrets that I quit and didn't stay with it, because when I became an arranger, the usefulness of piano skills, uh, you could play a lot more stuff in real time into MIDI with
Mhm.
good piano technique. But yeah, that's the childhood aspect of it. I should stop and let you hit some questions.
No, it's very good. Yeah, I'm just going to piggyback on some of that. So, so your father was, or your parents were they musicians or just because you had this baby grand, they must have had a reason for it.
So my dad, he was an upholsterer who, just to describe Ireland at the time, they were trying to save the Irish language. So they passed this law that said if you failed Irish in your primary cert, you couldn't continue with your education. So
Wow.
they made, and my father excelled in everything except Irish language. And at 12 years of age, his education was interrupted. I say all this because he then had to you went and you took up a trade, and in his case it was upholstery. But I have yet to meet a better read man than my father.
Hmm.
His knowledge of a plethora of subjects. Uh, I still remain in awe of that. So I kind of tell you, so somewhere along the way, at 18 years of age, without any prior musical experience, he decided to take piano lessons and started practicing seriously. Coming home on his lunch break from work,
Yeah.
he'd eat quickly, play for a half hour, and then go back, and then come home at night and play for hours. And so when they moved it was a flat on Moore Street in Dublin, one of the most famous central streets in Dublin, famous for its fruit and vegetable market. The lady selling the fruit and veg used to say to my mother, "Lovely music coming from your apartment."
Hmm.
And it was my dad and two of his friends having a weekly recital for each other. Uh, Now his teacher said, would you consider taking up cello? Because figured that he loved music so much, he'd have more fun if he played with other people.
Sure.
And thinking of chamber music. And my dad was, of course, thinking, I'm struggling enough with the piano. But you know, Jay, here's the takeaway of, I just mentioned this recently to somebody. The most, one of the more cherished musical memories for me are a couple of phrases of a Chopin waltz played by my father, and the rubato feel that he played with.
Right.
It was poetry. And I remember not feeling that, but not understanding it in that way.
Yeah.
To this day, it's my favorite version of. I hear other people play it and I go, not quite. Except for there's a pianist, same name as my dad, would you believe? Micheál O'Rourke, which is the Gaelic. He's a celebrated. He won the Chopin gold medal, and he actually called me when he was playing the Kennedy Center because someone gave him my number, and I told him I've been lying about being related to you for decades.
I mean,
But
yeah,
you know, isn't it interesting that you know, for a young child, that's the in the midst of all the Beatles and Hello Goodbye was a favorite song of mine and things, but there's also this Chopin waltz played by my dad.
and that's the one you remember. Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And now, how much about like, 'cause I just recently wrote a book on global pop music. There's a chapter in Music of Ireland, which I probably should have talked to you about but I don't think I knew you then when I started. But how much of traditional Irish folk music or really played into your development as well?
So that would go to my brother Andrew. See, I often wonder what's it like for people who I'm the youngest in my family and the impact of my brother's musical tastes on me. What would have happened if I was the oldest sibling? You know, would I have had a narrower perspective? So Andrew was the guy who there was a band called, I don't know if you came across him in your research, Planksty.
No.
Uh, so it's worth looking up there. With traditional Irish music, originally there was apart from the Cayley dances where you had almost like a stride piano kind of thing going on, and you'd have the boom diddle 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 diddle, and boom jot and jot and jot and jot. There was no chords in Irish music to speak of,
Mm.
except for O'Carolyn's harp music, blind harper from the 16th century, who Lewis Nash loves, by the way,
Oh,
the
wow.
drummer. Lewis, that's one of the things he and I first bonded on. Um, but generally speaking, Irish music was a lot of unison playing the same reels and jigs and hornpipes and a drone coming from the pipes or so the harmony wasn't a big thing in it. And along comes, you know, the folk explosion. And there were bands like the Sweeney's Men were, because some of those members went on to be in Planksty. They brought guitars, bouzouki, hurdy-gurdies, instruments from around the world to Irish music. And they were opening for rock bands with acoustic instruments and the people going crazy. Uh, so I would have been caught up in that. Because I loved it. I loved my brother had two of the albums, the earliest Planksty albums. And there's Andy Irvine, who's I think a genius in the music. He brought, I would say, uh, not polyrhythms, but the odd time signatures to Irish music. And you can hear the influence on Bill Whelan's River Dance, where they, you
Yeah.
know, the Eastern European, instead of that and that, that and that and that and that and that and that, you
Right.
know, Andy was doing that kind of stuff, I think, by ear, comping on
Mm.
mandola and another instrument I remember, the Sitter. Another name that should be mentioned, Sean O'Riada, who played as under the name Johnny Reedy in Paris in cafes playing piano. What he did for Irish music. This is the last I'll say in the Irish music for now, but when I was sent to the Gaeltacht, the Irish speaking camp where you went for a month, every week, it was the only time in my life I looked forward to going to Mass because we would hear Sean O'Riada's Mass in Gaelic and his Our Father in the Mass was it I was waiting for it every week, you know. Uh,
Wow.
there's he's such an important figure. He took elements of jazz, by the way. Instead of everyone playing unison, he would say they don't have a bridge in Irish music. It's A and B second. They might have A, B, and C.
Mm.
Uh, and it's A, B, B, C, or it could, so he would say, okay, the A section just fiddle and flute, and then when it comes to the B section, he suddenly started orchestrating on the fly,
Right.
and he was a great composer too. Elmer Bernstein was a big fan of his, for example. He wouldn't have been globally known, but he should have been.
Yeah, interesting. So you haven't really mentioned yet really how you came to play, like the guitar. Was it rock bands that influenced you, just recordings, and how did you get your first guitar?
My brother, who I mentioned earlier, Michael, gave me a guitar before he moved to England. Now, he moved to London, which is an hour away. And I remember that was one of the most devastating things to happen to me because that was my connection with music to him. And to me, he might as well have moved to Russia
Yeah.
because I would only see him at Christmas. And he gave me a guitar that had two strings on it. One of those and three strings actually, and it was the sixth and fifth and the first. So I bend the first and
Yeah,
try and do the vibrato being a lead, and then the bottom two I was able to danka danka danka. You know.
yeah, yeah.
He
Power
came
chord.
back 4 months later and was disgusted I hadn't put strings on it, that I hadn't gone out and spent the £5 a set of strings would have cost or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess I wasn't taking it that seriously until when something clicked. Like I do remember buying Paul McCartney's Red Rose Speedway album because I heard it when my father was buying headphones. The guy played it for me. He said, "You won't want to hear this music." They were listening to classical. My
Mm.
father was buying a set of Sennheiser. The one, you remember the old white ones with the blue and red, you different color foam.
Yeah, I do. Those are cool. Yeah.
Uh, they were the electrostatic headphones at the time, and I hear Paul McCartney singing on this. And I said, that sounds like the Beatles. And he goes, yeah, it's Paul McCartney. It reminded me of my brother. I went out and bought the record. Now I'm in. I'm playing piano. I've learned the songs, some of the songs overnight, literally. Uh, and I going back to the where I grew up on the beach. This is the God's honest truth. I bought my first good guitar, acoustic guitar, by collecting soda bottles on the beach
Okay.
and bringing them to the supermarket. I can still remember bags of bottles where you get the equivalent of 5 cents, 10 cents back. And the guy behind the counter was looking at his, and you bought all these, right? And I go, oh yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Lying through my eye teeth, of course. But I remember Connoisseur Instruments in Fountain Street in Dublin. They're no longer there. Anyone in Ireland would remember that store. I bought an Ibanez flat top acoustic, and now I'm in, right? Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
playing guitar now.
So besides like McCartney, who are some of the guitarists you were listening to? And like, when did jazz guitar players start to filter into your
That
conscious?
comes from my father again. I heard him talking to my mom and dad were friends with a bass player called Jimmy McKay, and I remember my dad saying, "Jimmy plays with Louis Stewart," and I was about 14, and I didn't pay much attention to that because why would I? It's a name. And then my dad pointed out they used to use these fillers when they couldn't sell advertising on Irish television, and they would have. I remember Louis Stewart playing All the Things You Are with. Apparently, they wipe these clips off. Sadly, nobody has them. But to train cameramen how to record live music, they brought Louis and a couple of quartets from Ireland in and practice filming them. And then they use these as fillers when until advertising started to become a thing. And I just remember I never heard guitar played so fast before. So that was the thing that hit me first. And I think somewhere along the way, I knew that this thing of bending and going crazy on the note and making all sorts of faces doing it wasn't real to me. It was choreography. It wasn't coming through here. And
Mm.
I knew I was looking for something else. And I just remember thinking it's either going to be classical jazz or flamenco because they were the fast things, the things I couldn't do. So I wasn't connecting in the same way that you would like to say now in retrospect that it was something in the music triggered something in me. I knew if I was going to be serious about it, it had to be something like this. And then Louis released an album called Louis the First, and my dad bought it. I think probably trying to get it in my ears a little bit. And he loved the version of Sending the Clowns that Louis played on solo guitar. And then not too long after that, maybe a year or two, a year maybe, the album that really changed a lot for me was Out in the Zone, which has just been re-released recently, and it's Louis playing solo with some overdubbed rhythm. And I started to go. I was now at the age, turning 17. I went to see him play and got the courage up to talk to him. And he was kind of a shy man himself. So it was kind of I really like your playing. Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah.
What do I say next? Um, and eventually I learned by watching him playing at the Bag It In. He was the house guitarist in Ronnie Scott's club at the time. So he was coming back to Dublin. Maybe on his week off from Ronnie's, he'd come over here and he'd into Dublin rather and play what was really a rock venue at the time and pack it out. There was a line around the block to hear him and John Wadham, the drummer. And I was watching him, and I just remember I honestly had two buses to catch home, and I remember him playing the sharp nine chord and going, that's yeah, I've heard that. I heard Joe Pass play that one. And I'm going, now I've got two buses to remember that shape. I
Yeah.
didn't know what they were called, but that's I was watching him like if somebody shot film at the time, you'd see a row of drummers and guitar players just like this, you know.
Sharing.
So that's
Wow.
where I really that was the transcendent thing for me, you know.
Okay. So no formal training early on the guitar. It was all
No,
oh, interesting. Wow. Okay. So when is it like?
sorry, I should correct myself on that. That's I was Louis wouldn't teach. He was done. I kept hearing from people that, oh, it's too bad you weren't around a year ago. He was still teaching in Capel Street. That's all I kept hearing. So I found a guy that had studied with him who was now focused. He wasn't really trying to be a jazz guitar player, but he had spent a couple of years with Louis and he shared his notes with me and played through them. I booked a month of lessons with him. His name is Alan Grundy, and he's a very fine composer, still writing and publishing music in Ireland, classical guitar. And so while I didn't have formal kind of lessons, and he made it clear that I'm not really a jazz guitar player. I didn't, but he showed me this had to have been a huge help for me. Louis' version of All the Things You Are, when I'm going from zero to trying to play in flat keys and all the it catapulted me to another level.
Yeah.
And it really was about taking stuff off records then for me. It's
Okay.
not understanding a lot until I got into arranging. I think that's what put theory into my. Sorry, we're going to be
That's cool.
greeted by His Majesty here once in a while.
Yeah, that's a cool looking cat, man.
Do you know that sticker that you see on cars, who rescued who? Uh, I got this guy when he was 7, and he won't leave my side. It's amazing.
He's
Until I play the
smart.
guitar.
Oh, that doesn't like the guitar,
Not my guitar playing. He'd love you. He'd
huh?
love
He
Russell
like,
Malone. He'd love it. When I take up the guitar, he looks at me with that kind of, really? You're going to do that now?
yeah, what incredible markings though on that cat. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a Bengal, part Bengal, so the tiger breed in him.
Yeah. He looks like he looks almost a little angry, but he's that's cool.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's only angry with other cats. That's the funny thing. Very possessive about, but he loves humans.
I guess he
Well, so
likes
Louis Stewart was, for anyone who doesn't know, I often make the comparison that, if somebody says to me, "How did you come to play?" You're from not exactly a hotbed of jazz guitar.
right.
Well, the bar was so high for us because of Louis. He'd already, by the time I started playing, he'd already done 2 tours with Benny Goodman, played with Dizzy Gillespie in France, Ronnie Scott's house band, and later on, not too long after, was with George Shearing. In Ronnie Scott's band, he got to play with. So it was like having. I always say Louisville, Kentucky had Muhammad Ali, and nobody can explain away where we had the same thing with Louis Stewart.
Hmm.
World class jazz guitar, uh, and being from a small city, I remember saying, "Did you hear what Tal Farlow said about Louis?" And Joe Passett apparently said one of the best guitar players I've ever heard, and they were all effusive. And we would be like, "Yes,"
Like,
But for the rest of us gigging, the bar was so high if you took up guitar. I remember being told, you're wasting your time. Louis done it already.
hmm,
But you know who the only one that wasn't saying that to me at the time was? Louis Stewart himself.
really? Okay.
He encouraged me, booked me onto gigs I wasn't ready to play yet. He wouldn't show me anything because I think teaching was an uncomfortable thing for him. Once or twice, I just boxed him into a corner where
Yeah.
I really had that. But what he did, Jay, and I feel this was probably, yeah, he would play records for me for hours and sit there and he'd say, "What do you want to hear next?" And sometimes I'd have requests because I would see albums in his collection. Whatever he played for me, he said he would tell me why he liked that track. Listen to how this guy builds his solo. And builds his solo. I was 18. I wasn't thinking about building solos. I was thinking about how fast I could play.
Right.
And so he was teaching me, I guess, jazz music appreciation,
Sure.
the jazz perspective, because he held so and so comped. Now I'm aware of comping and how important it is that it's not just learning a set of changes and playing it the same way over chorus after chorus,
Yeah.
you
Sure.
know. So I believe he was very clever in that way. He taught me how to teach myself. Uh,
Wow. It sounds like he had a huge impact, and like particularly, I mean, he's a name I'm mildly aware of, but I guess when you have a hometown hero like that, it's just you know unavoidable.
no, he was uh, you know, you think about this. My first trip to New York came about. Aer Lingus approached me because I had won the jazz section of a competition called Young Musician of the Future. And it was the only time that they had a jazz section to it. It was all classical musicians playing concerto, the woodwind section, and now they add a jazz section. And
Okay.
Noel Keelan, another world class, I reckon we had two world class musicians in those days. Noel was an arranger and great pianist. Um, so I had to play with him. For me, to enter the competition was a chance to play with him in the rhythm section. And as soon as I played and the other judges there, Noel's comment was, "You got any gigs for me?" Tongue in cheek. That was
Yeah.
his way of endorsing me.
Sure.
So he ended up writing the arrangement for me to play with the orchestra, which also he said, "How do you want it?" And I actually remember him smiling when I was ordering off the menu. I said to him, we picked Once I Loved because he suggested it would be better with the rhythm section that the orchestra had, not to try swinging something. Uh, so I said to him, could I play the first A section in solo guitar rubato and then I'll set the tempo and they come in and I'll play it in octaves. And then I said, when it comes to the solo, could you put a section where it goes into kind of like a double time, that kind of samba feel? Because and I remember I was laughing because it'll make me sound like I'm playing faster than I am.
All right.
And it was as a result of that, Aer Lingus offered me sponsored travel. But what was interesting about it, I wasn't allowed to tell anyone. They weren't doing it for publicity. It was a gesture back to the public because they were a semi-state body. They were half owned by the government at the time.
Wow.
So
Okay.
they offered me, would you like to go to London once a month for lessons? We'll pay for your transportation. My answer was, how about New York? And
Hmm.
there was a huge disparity between the fares to America in those days and the fare to London.
Sure.
And I remember the lady smiled. She goes, "Let me ask my boss about that." She came back to me and says, "Okay, we're good to go. Now it's game on." And my life changed from that. I arrived into the Jersey Shore, actually, Little
Okay.
Silverside Avenue.
Hmm.
My cousins were living there. During that trip, I went, I was brought by connections that Louis gave me. First of all, Bucky Pizzarelli had me sit in the Pierre Hotel. I was terrified. Jay, coming from Europe in those days, New York is the Mecca, and there's part in your head you're kind of wondering, is this the night I find out I'm I've fallen in love with something I can't have? that I'm just not going to be good enough for. And
And this
but
must have been like early 1980s, I would imagine, right?
82,
Yeah.
1982, the summer of 82, Memorial Day weekend is when I arrived.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I arrived into a barbecue straight off the plane.
Yeah.
Um, but Bucky, I sat in with him in the Pierre Hotel. Can you imagine this 24 hours? Played with a guy who's not famous, but was a great player, Tommy Furtado, who was playing at uh, I can't, not the, round the corner from the Pierre, one of the, I'm blanking now, but he was the house pianist. And Kathleen Landis, I sat in with her, the singer, and I just remember, wow, everyone, if I was living here, I'd be playing with so many different people, and it's going to shape, it's got to be good for you to have that pool. But Bucky was amazing because I arrived in and he goes, "Hey, pal, what you got in there?" I go, "It's an L5." He goes, "Well, take it out and play something." He didn't give me time to get nervous.
Yeah.
I plug into his amp at the chord, and he goes, "What do you want to do?" And I remember thinking, "Days of Wine and Roses," and playing. And I take one chorus of a solo, and he goes, "Go on, go on." I, when you're that young, all I want to do is play 25 choruses, but somehow or other, the gods made me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's better to be asked to take a second one than to be stopped. Uh, so he kept me up for a few tunes, and I remember Mellow Tone was another one, and he couldn't have been kinder to me. The next day, I'm about to board the train or go to the Penn Station, and I call into my cousins. I say, "Were there any of those guys called back?" I go, "Oh, thank God you called." There's a guy called Wayne Wright. All connections from Louis, by the way. Wayne Wright said if you can meet him at 12 at the China Song, he goes, "Where are you now?" And I said, "I'm on 42nd and 8." And at that stage, that was not a great place to be. The good old days in New York,
Yeah.
taxi driver era. Uh, and he said, "Oh, that's a pretty bad. Well, you're not too far. You can make it." This was about a quarter to 11, 10:45. He goes, "You get up to the China Song. Wayne Wright's going to take you to meet Les Paul." And can you imagine the effect on somebody, 22 years of age in New York? Les wasn't gigging at the time. And we're going to his house.
Hmm.
I meet him. Martin Taylor's in the car, going. A guy called Jasbo Collins, a famous beatnik DJ, and I didn't know who he was. And there was one other guy, turned out to be a New York Times journalist,
Oh, okay.
wrote the article because Bucky, when I came back 3 months later, said, "Was that you in Les Paul's house?" The guy wrote an article on it, and it's lists Martin Taylor, who's in town with Stefan Grappelli,
Mhm.
and some Irish guy, but nobody can remember his name. You know,
Uh, okay.
the
Yeah.
same day, and then I'll pass on this. Martin Taylor had got listed for him plus one, and they were hoping he'd bring Stefan Grappelli, they were in town for the Cool Jazz Festival, to the Vanguard to hear Jim Hall. I'd been buying vinyl, and one of them was a Woody Shaw United album, and Martin said he sat in with Jim Hall last night. Maybe he'll be there again. I'm thinking, oh, I'd never be that lucky. And I'm sitting at the table, and Martin goes, "He's here." No, I was never an autograph guy, but Martin's pushing me to go up, and I'm glad he did because I go up, "Excuse me, Mr. Shaw, I'm a guitar player," and really terrified. I was scared of talent, and I was in awe of Woody Shaw. I thought he was the next level. Miles Davis, you played in his band, you became famous. It's minutes later. The welcome I got from this man, I can never forget. He's his arm around me going, "Hey man, this cat's over from Ireland, bought me." He writes his phone number on the album cover and offers to pick me up to take me to a gig that he's playing. I was I couldn't make it because I remember that thinking what a lost opportunity. But I just remember my welcome to New York came via Woody Shaw. It's
And these people, it's just out of sure friendship or kindness that like they had no clue who you were or your ability.
no, I had no clue who I was. I was just, I suppose, what you think about the people that we get approached by sometimes, in the music business, it's kind of funny thing, I'll have somebody in the band and somebody will come to me and say, "Hey man, why didn't you call me for that?" Well, straight away, that's take this guy off my list.
Right, right, sure.
And, there's when people are that kind of pushy. So if somebody's coming up saying, "Oh man, I wish you could hear me playing. I'm the baddest cat," but they probably saw the respect that I had and the love of the music, I think is
Yeah,
that kind of maybe over it. But also the kindness of you think I'm an immigrant coming here, and the welcome I'm getting is from Bucky Pizzarelli 3 months later, without knowing the impact of needing a green card and work permission, which I didn't have. I came to study. Um, Bucky, when he sees me at the Pierre, he turns to his manager, Dick Abel, and says, "Take him down now to Tommy or whatever the guy's name was. They're looking for a trio 6 nights a week. He's perfect for it." And he said, "I'll get you the other cats." And I'm going, "Bucky, I can't do it. I'm, those days the union, and I didn't want to create a situation where I could be in trouble.
right,
So if I wanted to come back, and I said I don't have a green card, and the famous line, Martin Pizzarelli and I repeat this over and over again. Bucky's manager, Dick Abels, who became very important in my life, actually. Uh, Bucky says, "Talk to Dick Abels. He'll get you any card you want." He didn't
oh,
realize this was a federal, you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. Wild. Yeah, and then it's like obviously a big part of your career is arranging, and it sounds like even when you were doing that competition, that arranging was something already like inherent, like you were really thinking about, I want to play the A section solo and I want to do a bossa or whatever in the B section. When did you start to like really dig in, and how did you learn how to arrange without real formal training? Didn't I don't think you went to music school, right? So how did that?
No, well, in terms of, you know, I always think about when I ask, yes, I was self-taught, but self-taught with a qualification. I had a 5 hour lesson with Pat Martino in '83 that really changed everything for me because he had now become my hero a few
Sure.
years earlier. I was just floored. So then that doesn't answer the arranging question. The arranging thing was there was an older rhythm guitar player living in my town. He's actually a neighbor of Adam Clayton's because he told me he brought Adam Ron Carter's book as a present back from
Hmm.
the United States, and he brought these other books that had there were Warren Noon. Do you remember those Warren Noon's guitar books that
I don't think I know those ones. Yeah.
and so there would have been. Uh, I had the Mickey Baker book, and I had the Major Seven to the Major Six going on, or something else. But for chords, this now I'm seeing seven flat nines, and he couldn't get over it. Bert Crosland was this man's name, and he was a Freddie Green style player.
Sure.
He played an old guitar that had Kalamazoo on it. It was so old that it was before Gibson put their
All right. Wow. Okay.
so and he used to say, "I'm just a chugga chugga." That's what he was. But when I first met him, he was one of the people that kind of said, "Oh, I don't know if I'd do that if I were you. Louis already done it." But when he heard me play and saw how quickly I just learned this chord, I was putting it to use. He was suddenly his line shifted to, when you go to New York, if you don't know this song, you won't work. When your lover is gone, very few people play that,
Yeah.
but people do. So he made me learn a bunch of obscure standards just by, because I told him my dream, I couldn't play for shit, excuse my French, but my dream was to go to New York and play jazz guitar 6 nights a week.
Sure.
And all of a sudden he shifted from being, "Oh, I wouldn't if I were you," to, "All right, game is on." And he
Yeah.
played me Robert Farnon's albums with Sinatra, the only album he recorded in the studio outside of the United States. And Nelson Riddle's, he had two EPs of the Wee Small Hours of the Morning album.
Yeah.
And the revered way that arrangers were spoken of because these were the guys and maybe it's because of the orchestral music I was hearing from my dad, or I remember thinking, I have to be able to do this if I'm going to be I, I don't know if you went through this when you were younger, that it's almost a competitive thing with yourself. You think you have to be great at everything. And, but there obviously had to be something more going on behind the scenes, a love of harmony. And because nowadays, for me, orchestral instruments, I kind of feel they're like having a painter's canvas, and there's all these, you're dipping in different colors. And that's the
Sure.
visually or internally the way I kind of think about it. Voicings obviously fascinate me, and how different people voiced, particularly for strings. That became a big study of mine, private. But I didn't have formal training. So what happens when you bring your first chart in? There was a big band in Ireland that I was playing in, that was sponsored. It was a government sponsored to get people off the dole queue, I think. So the musicians, there was a they we were able to put this band together in the musicians union, and I tried out bringing in a chart, and so many mistakes in the chart. The gap between the trumpet section and the trombones I voiced was, uh, and I was given a terrible time by one. My sax writing sounded. I was using guitar voicings, coming out with open.
Right.
You know, some of the stuff transfers. Uh, And I had the book. This is an interesting one. I don't know if you ever got into arranging, but there was a book by Russell Garcia called The Professional Arranger Composer.
Okay, I am familiar with that book, but
A
yeah.
lot of people had that book. You look at it and you go, this is not a great book, but yet Jim McNeely, I think, had it in early days. It, there must have been something in there that got us all writing. And I, Mike Nielsen, a great guitar player from Ireland, who'd gone to Berkeley, kindly shared me he didn't really want to get into arranging, but he had taken some arranging classes, and he gave me his workbook.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Yeah,
of
yeah.
it. So I think it's the self-taught thing it was really grabbing it wherever you could, Jay. It was kind of, and coming to the United States, I knew the minute was, I landed here and was in New York City, and even driving through Seabright and going, Seabright, stop the car now. Tal Farlow lives here. Do you know
Yeah,
who Tal Farlow is? You know,
right, right.
I just thought I got to get over there,
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know.
and did you well, there's a lot there. That's really cool. Well, no, number one, it sounds a lot like sort of the way your father learned from reading a lot, figuring things out, you know. Um, but also like the arranging.
Make interesting connections, actually, Jay. I haven't thought of it that way, and you did it earlier on with something too that I thought, wow, he's right. I haven't thought of it that way. But sorry, go ahead. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when you look at it from an outsider's perspective, I guess you could see things like that, or at least assume. But um, so I mean, there's a lot there. So I mean, Pat Martino, you mentioned. I'd like to go back to that for a moment because I mean, he's an enigma to me. I mean, I never got to know him or meet him. And you said just like a 5 hour lesson. So within that, talk about Pat if you could, and your connection with him and what you learned from him specifically.
Um, I was completely in awe walking through the door. I was terrified of him because I'd heard a story this is prior to some of the great stories in his book that came out years later, but that somebody had gone to him for a lesson and said, "Let me show you what I'm doing and tell me what I'm doing wrong." And Pat apparently said, "Leave the guitar in the case, go and practice this for 3 months and come back to me. And if you still feel compelled to play for me, then, you know." And
Okay.
so when I called him up, Vic Juris had given me his phone number, and I'd met Vic through Vic's first teacher, Eddie Berg, who my cousin coincidentally had taken basic guitar lessons with, and Eddie and him kind of hit it off. My cousin wasn't a jazz guitar player, but Eddie really liked him, and uh, ended up being gave me a couple of gigs to sub on, and I remember he had a real D'Angelico, one of the old ones, and allowed me to play it. And I was terrified. Really, you're going to let me? I sat in the village gate with him, and he said, "We got to connect you with Vic." I happened to say to Vic, I envy you having studied with Pat Martino. I don't know if you knew Vic at all, but
A
Vic is
little bit.
a matter of fact. He goes, "You want to study with Pat? I'll give you his number right now." I go, really, is Pat okay? Because at this stage, I think one magazine had reported him as being dead, and then they had to correct themselves a month later. Might have been, was it Downbeat? I'm not sure.
I hope not.
But
Uh,
there were rumors. This is before the internet, so rumors were flying around um, and that he'll never play again. And so when I got to his place, well, first of all, I called him, and I just remember he was the staccato of his. Uh, I knew it was him, but I said, "Could I speak to Pat Martino, please?" Speaking, and I'm going, it's, I was, a kid at the time, and I'm going, I got your number from my name. Told him who I was. I got your number from Vic Juris, and he jumped straight in. Vic is a truly great artist in his own right. That was like programmed.
yeah.
So I'm thinking I'd about $1,000 left, and if I have to go home early, I'm not missing this lesson because I'd heard some of the celebrity they would charge you $1,000 a day or something like that, and I was willing to drop that because it's Pat Martino. So I say to him, "How much an hour do you charge?" And he goes, "I don't charge by the hour. I charge by the lesson. A lesson can be 5 minutes or 5 hours, and it's $25."
Hmm.
I got a 5 hour lesson. I remember all the way there thinking, I hope to God I'm not the 5 minute guy.
Yeah.
Please.
All right.
I have visions of me walking in and going, oh no, out of here. He could see I was in awe of him, and he's somehow or somewhere along the way, he stripped it away, and he just said, I do remember this, like this is the enigma of him. I
All right.
want him to say, hold the pick this way and use this fingering that. And he was trying to get as far away from that. And he go, this is just holding the guitar like this. This is just the carpenter's hammer, he said.
Mm,
But
yeah.
in truth, I don't think carpenters are going around saying, have you got the 57 hammer? It's really good. But he was trying to get me away from obsessing about the instrument. And he had about a book that thick, because he hadn't published anything yet, printed up on dot matrix printer for me.
Wow.
Early
Oh,
days of computers and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
an old Mac, and he put a lot of a forethought into me arriving because he figured he's going back to Ireland. I want to line him up for, and I remember thinking it was important to him that he shared with me, and then there was a bunch of what were probably like that, the first book of linear expressions, I think they call it. He he gave me a bunch of those type of things, and he goes, and here's some lines that give you an idea of how I conceive things, you know.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, he sounds like I've heard other people talk about him, and the way you describe him, like he chose his words very carefully. It sounds like the way he kind of
I
expressed.
think honestly now at that stage he had had the brains aneurysm and the
Yeah.
surgery. You know that expression you hear when they say about somebody they've brains to burn. Uh,
Hmm.
he had a he had a colossal amount of his left frontal lobe removed, and they remember how they used to talk about a lobotomy and how somebody was a dummy for the rest. I think I would joke with him at some points. I'd say, thank God, because with the way you are now, his knowledge of so much stuff, and I don't think he ever, I can't imagine him sitting down and going, I don't feel like practicing, I'm going to watch a movie. He was constantly writing music and writing, creating, uh, and calligraphy. He was, I think every minute he could spend doing something of value to him
Yeah.
was was the way he lived his life. But years later, I should say, I got to work with him on. You interviewed Seth Abramson recently. That's triggered
Sure.
a joking exchange between us. Seth's a good friend of mine, but Seth happened to. We saw Pat playing, and we were talking about a ballad he had just played, the Charles Mingus, the one that sounds a bit like Lush Life. Do you know that ballad? And
Not pork pie hat.
no, it's based off Lush Life.
based off Lost
and
Songs.
it's I think it's called Duke Ellington's Song of Love or something. It's a
His titles are always kind of strange, but yeah,
yeah, and I'd never heard the song before, and Pat played it like he just learned it for a week before for this gig. Apparently, he just picked it out
right.
and we were talking to Pat, me and Seth, saying that you know everyone reacts to you for all this other greatness that you do, but you on ballads, you know, like the We'll Be Together Again album was a hugely important album to me, and his playing of the melody and the way bar lines seem to disappear on the ballad and You Don't Know What Love Is, for example, his it's and Pat just smiled. He goes, um, I feel sometimes I'd like to just play ballads all night long. And I remember saying, "Man, man, I'd love to hear that." And I just said to him, did you ever do an orchestral project or ever?" And he goes, "No, I'd love to." And then Seth just said, "David's an amazing Seth starts," and Pat goes in that moment. He goes, "I would love," and he's smiling at me because I'm not pushing myself, but Seth is letting him know, and he
Sure.
goes, "I'd love to do it," and he points at me. Then he goes, "And I'd love to do it with him." And I knew I wasn't going to make the same mistake I'd made with Cassandra Wilson earlier. I just
Yeah.
said, "Pat, if this is something that you really want to do in series, what's the next move? What does it come from me or do you?" And he goes, "I'm out on the road until this date. Give me a day to get back in and call me." And I did. I go to his house, and that began something that I really feel deeply privileged to have had the opportunity to do. I was taking a once monthly not lesson, it was a lesson, once monthly drive to Philly to collaborate with him.
Mhm.
Uh, Now think of the position I'm in here. You know, this is my hero from him, George Benson, and Louis Stewart were the three guitar players
Okay.
living that were, and I'm going to his house and I'm thinking, how does this work? Does he tell me what he wants or do I write something? And
Mhm.
I better show up with something, otherwise we're just talking. So I brought two things. A very big band heavy with some woodwind version of The Great Stream just ahead. And the first two A sections, I don't think I went beyond that, plus an intro on You Don't Know What Love Is.
Yeah.
And I had my laptop with me. Pat, Pat sits down. He says, "How's this going to work?" And I remember at the time saying to him, um, "I've been thinking about this too." And I said, "I didn't know who was going to pick music or how it was going to happen." I said, "But for years, Paul McCartney would not do the Beatles songs in the 70s. He was only pushing Wings. And then when he did Wings Over America, I remember friends saying, he just did three Beatles songs, but they're acoustic, you know." And nowadays, I just seen him play in the new City Field, Shea Stadium reopening. And
Yeah.
he did a 3 hour show where very proudly goes through his entire, and I said to Pat, I think some people want to hear you doing your fusion stuff. Some people want to hear you playing standards. And I went through and then there's some of the stuff from recent times. And then I said, I think the success of this is going to hinge upon we have to do whatever you're into right now also. But if you could touch on all these things. And he
Mhm.
paused and he goes, interesting. And I said, the other thing is, he was saying, so am I going to read parts? Or I said, again, what I was thinking was, you're Frank Sinatra and I'm Nelson Riddle. I've
Right.
got to surround you with this plush carpet, well, that can
Yeah.
have sharp edges if necessary, while you do your thing. And from that moment on, he went from being like, there was the first meeting in his house. I could tell that there was a bit of tension because it involved, he had the same questions as I had. Is this guy going to come and tell me what to play? Or,
Yeah.
and it went from that. This is probably one of my more proudest things that I look back on. A couple of weeks later, I'm saying, Pat, what would you like here? Do you want to do this or do you want to? And he goes, no, I'd rather leave those decisions up to you. He completely trusted me. And
Right.
once I knew that was happening, because later on, I wanted to bring Seth along because Seth loves him so much. And since he and there was one of a guy who'd worked with Pat who was kind of on the outs at that stage. And he was pressurizing me to tell Pat I want to come and see what you guys are up to and all this kind of stuff. I won't say names, but I
Yeah.
said to Pat, there's a couple of people who would really like to come to one of these sessions. And Pat's response was, I'd rather we keep everyone out of the room, everyone else out of the room until we lock in the repertoire.
Right. Right.
And again, that told me that he saw me as a team player. But for Pat Martino fans that are, I'll do bullets on this, I would arrive at his house and he would show me what he's working on there and
Okay.
then. And there were all these books of, you know, that octave dispersal stuff that he does.
Yes.
There's a whole bunch of stuff that looked like that Slaminski kind of in his handwriting, his
Right.
beautiful
Right.
handwriting, books of it. And I remember thinking when he was out of the room, will I take a few quick phone photos and just thinking that's not cool. That's
Right.
I didn't do it. But then he turned to me and go, okay, what you got for me? And sometimes I would have 8 bars of a song and then a fuller version of something else. He was taking it as I would. That first session though, when he played along with "You Don't Know What Love Is," that another one, there was a tear came down his face and he looked sideways at me. He goes, "Yeah, man.
Mm.
I'm sorry we never got to the finish line with this to do it publicly, but to have that moment for me was
Right. Yeah.
I've lived off that
Right.
in down times, you know.
So how was he hearing the arrangements? Were they on your like you had sequenced it or something, and that's how he heard
I
them?
was
Or
playing them on Sibelius at the time. I now use Dorico,
okay.
and you know the quality of samples nowadays are. He was playing along with QuickTime instruments on my. Do you remember the QuickTime instruments? They were the most bland sounding.
Yeah, terrible. Yeah.
He was putting it. They were awful, and it was the quickest load.
Right.
And then halfway through us working together, Sibelius instruments came out where they started to. They had some custom bespoke samples just that would probably lo-fi quality, but they were more closer to. We were moving in the direction of
Yeah.
kind of samples nowadays, and he would hook it up to. He had a mixing desk and some really good speakers, and probably a bit of know-how, and he made it sound as good as it was going to sound.
Yeah.
But I remember at one point I hadn't gotten to explain to him, and it was on the end of Days of Wine and Roses. I went with an idea that he used on that album, The Maker, where there's these amazing sounding polychords, um, and he's just soloing over them, and they're real pat sounding chords, and he's reading my screen, which is jumping all over the place.
Right.
By the way that as software got along, they weren't centering the page always. That they
Yeah.
would,
Yeah.
but I became aware of how great his ears were because he hears those chords coming up and he looks up at me and I have it on I have it on video actually, phone video where he goes, "Do I blow here?" You know, and uh, and he's by ear making all these changes. So a lot of people think about his memory loss and why he always had music on the stand. That was insurance.
Mhm.
He remembered a lot of it, but at any moment he was worried it could let him down. And
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's wild. I mean, so it really seems like, at least when you talked about Cassandra Wilson and Pat Martino, when you do an arrangement, it's almost as if you're looking at the artist themselves, almost like maybe a film director would look at an actor, and really writing based, like writing around them, as opposed to writing and then they come in later. Is it? Am I accurate in that? Like you really try to seem to get
you're
like
unbelievably accurate. One of my favorite things to do through the years is inside the actor's studio,
right,
where there were celebrities who I didn't like based on the gossip column stuff that we would we think they're massive ego. I hear them talking about their craft, directors, and I remember thinking this resonates with me so much about. I think one thing that really got to me was, can you imagine playing the part of a musician in his 50s and you're cast in that role? A lot of actors will come along and they'll write their own. biography of that musician from birth to,
Mhm.
and that fascinated me. They won't share that with anyone. That's
Right.
their private path to get it. So I found that now we do have to address the fact sometimes you're a craftsman. I need a chart by tonight, swing and medium tempo on this song.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're drawing. I'm not saying there's no art in that because Nelson Riddle's high bar for quick delivery was phenomenal. But it's different when you have Only the Lonely with Sinatra and Nelson. I hear various stories from people, but I know the truth. People saying that that why he wasn't there to conduct that session and that the reason it sounds so good was that the concert master conducted. No, the reason that sounded so good was Nelson's mother was dying during that period and it tore his heart out. He was very close to her and he couldn't be there at the session because I think his mom's funeral.
Right.
But the quality of the writing on that album, you can tell that and close to you, the one with the string quartet and
Sure.
Wee Small Hours, the amount of time that was put into those,
Mm.
that there was, and the collaboration with talking with Sinatra. And, Nelson said that Sinatra would say for 45 minutes playing him different classical music, maybe this. And he goes, why am I playing you this? You know what I want. But it was very clever. He was telling him what he wanted, mood
Yeah.
wise. And so I am affected by, I'm also one of these people, like when I put a band together, I'm not a fan of people who, let's say I hire you to play bass, these kind of guys, and then you come on the gig, and I'm going, no, no, man, don't play two there, play four there. And there are people like that. I
Sure.
noticed that Cedar Walton, I got to work with him, uh, Jackie McLean, Tommy Flanagan. They didn't tell you what to play. I actually asked Tommy, "Do you want me to play Freddie Green?" Or and Tommy goes, "Would you do that?" He goes, and he mentioned the name of a guitar player who he'd asked to do that in the studio in the 60s. And he went off on me. He got mad at me when I was on a gig one time. Lewis Nash is taking a brush solo and he goes like this to me. And I knew he wanted Freddie Green to play over the changes,
Right.
brush
Yeah.
solo. Uh, so I look at myself as the kind of director who casts actors because I like what they do. I want to see what you bring to my project. I
Right.
consider that the next level, the human side that I hire Jay Sweet for a gig. I want to see what Jay is gonna. I'm gonna walk out of that room later going, man, he took that a whole different place. Wow, I didn't realize that. I like that better than what I was. You know, that's why
Yeah.
collaboration excites me, I think.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, because it's such I think of arranging, like you said, and we've talked when I talked to you last, you'd mentioned a project that was very much like an artisan type of project where you had to, you knew, the maybe the featured artist wasn't as strong as maybe you would like, and you had to do the job. It was a job that you had to do. But this concept of like artist versus artisan, because like arranging is very much an artisan kind of a thing. But it seems like even when you play gigs or when you write, you really want to pull out that person's personality. And I think even like we've only played together once, and there's a certain warmth about you that I really appreciated, and you were very kind to me. And I was just doing a fill-in thing and just trying not
Yeah,
to.
but dude, what a gig to fill in on. They're hard gigs. Those big band charts where they don't give you chord symbols and they
Yeah,
write out a bass line. And
right.
now you got to play that bass line and groove it. They're going bum 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 bum, and you have to ba-dum, dum, dum, and I'm looking at you nailing it because I've been through a lot of bass players in that band, and Gary always comes in rock solid, and I hadn't remembered until you remind me, and I'm 99% sure that when I did meet you before was in when I was playing in Nikio's in Belmar that you would have come in with Joe Ack and Doug Clark
Okay.
after a gig. I think that's when I met you. If I'm
Okay.
Because
That
you
sounds
reminded me I had met you earlier. Because I'm hearing you playing, going, wow, this guy's on it. I was very very impressed just by the standard of reading, and
I
that's not
appreciate.
an easy gig to jump in on.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, and that's nice of you to say. But like you made me feel very comfortable, and I imagine that's how you are with most people, and probably part of besides your craft. I mean, you get to work with all these legendary players, and it sounds like you have a willingness to take direction from them, but also this collaborative thing that you're talking about, where if you go in with a preconceived idea, and I'm like you, I'd rather come into a situation and really not have that. And even if I'm leading a band, I don't want to direct too much because I hire these people because they are, in a sense, great actors or great. They have a voice, um, and that sounds just the way you've described your approach to people like Pat Martino, and you keep going back to Nelson Riddle with Sinatra. I mean, Sinatra is such a singular voice, and not a trained musician in the classical sense, but he knew he liked what Nelson Riddle did, and I don't know. It seems to have come full circle the way you're describing things. I don't know if I'm
So
just
I would say people that have been very impactful. Celino Clark, the organ player, was in his band for 12 years in Harlem, and at the time I was the only white guy in the band, and the welcome that I received.
right.
Well, first of all, Celino is one of the most important people in my life anyway. Um, he was George Benson's best friend, so that was my connection to George, or one of his best friends, and they've known one another since, before George hit. And so through him, I was exposed to George a lot. And George used to joke about how some people think that me and Celino never went anywhere without one another.
Mm.
He would drop me home after gigs in the opposite direction to where he lives. And I suppose, playing in the organ groups in Harlem. And again, the first time I played with George was up in the La Famille, and I was not going near that stage. And there was upstairs and downstairs, and the one upstairs had a piano, wasn't an organ group. And George was about to step down, so the room empty. They all went downstairs. I come up ready to sit in with the band for the last remaining dregs. George, about to plug out, turns around, beams this big smile, goes, "Hey man," and looks at the guitar. What you got there? An L5? And he turns back around and goes, "What do you want to play? Stella by Starlight?" And
So
he launched it. I'm thinking, I hope he gives me the first solo so I don't have to follow him. He takes the first solo, and I'm going, oh my God. Uh, it's swinging. It's everything that you love, and
yeah.
George is playing. And I make the mistake because now the rhythm section don't want to drop it after his solo. They want to stay up there. And I'm trying to come in where he left it, which is
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
it, you're going to fall off the bridge very quickly. And George, the only person that would have heard this besides me was the front table right there in front of us. Very gently says, "Relax, brother."
Yeah.
And he turns around, gives the rhythm section a glare to. They were pissed at having to bring it back down. But I was taught a huge lesson there because now I start to build my own solo. And there's a moment where you click into gear, right? And the minute I hit that, George heard it, and he goes on the microphone. That's what I'm talking about, y'all. And now I've got the whole room who's come. I ended up playing, I'd say, a 45 minute to an hour set, just me, him, and rhythm section, and him trading eights and fours with me,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was avoiding stuff I copped from him. And eventually, that thing with the octave and the note in between the fifth or the fourth.
Right.
I
Right.
did one, but do da 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 dee da, and he looks and he goes, "Oh yeah," and look. I said, "I'll give you a royalty for that one." I reckon our deep love of one another began at that moment. He laughed.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
he laughed so much, and from that moment on, he was, you know, uh, I'm sure you, being a guitar player and a bass player, will understand. When we encounter greatness like this, the imposter syndrome that can come in and go, what possibly could I play that he hasn't done so much better? And
Right.
it took me years to realize it goes back to that actor thing. You think about Morgan Freeman's voice, James Earl Jones, Sir Laurence Olivier. As their careers went on, people just wanted to see them playing a role. And what does that say? We all have a voice if we'd only accept it.
Yeah.
And that's what George was hearing.
Hmm.
Um, Years later, I put the guitar down for a couple of years. I thought I was an arranger and, I couldn't keep it up with both. And my mother had passed. So Selena and George were hanging out. And Selena said, somebody wants to talk to you. George comes on the phone and expressed his condolences about my mom. And then he said, he must have gotten wind that I wasn't playing the guitar, and he asked me, and I said, "No, I haven't been." He goes, "Brother, I'm not getting off this phone unless you promise me that when you do, you're gonna take that guitar out of that case, playing." And Jay, I just remember thinking, this does not happen to everybody else. I
Right. Right.
cannot devalue this in my mind. I have to. I
Yeah.
had George Benson, one of my heroes,
That's cool, man. Yeah,
tell me, you know.
it is. And it's funny you mentioned. I don't want to keep you much longer because we've been talking for a while. But I could talk to you forever. But um, I had an opportunity to interview George Benson for the podcast, and it was a very short conversation. It was hard to get him, but um, and I'm learning more and more as I do more of these that idea of imposter syndrome. Even the biggest names, including George Benson, what I picked up when talking to him, especially in his early days, because also like you, self figured it out from talking to people, self taught. It's like they have that too. You know what I mean? And I'm amazed. Like you think these fully realized musicians, or at least in your mind or my mind, are so confident in what they do, and it's not always the case. They tell the same stories, about how they came up, and it's a pretty amazing thing, what we have an opportunity to be around these people and to do. And
I think one of the big lessons I had to learn, and it's only more recently, like there's a third component to it too, but two, um, I did, if you were super confident, were a unique egomaniac, and I discovered after a while there are people, I know a lot of them, who are aware of their prowess, but they're also humbled by the the greater scheme of what music can remind us on a daily basis that, hey kid, you sound good, but there's so much more out there for you to learn. And then it's the imposter syndrome that can come in with that maybe if you're tired or you're in a weak moment, and like we're sensitive people, we're dealing in the emotional business. We're playing, sometimes we're saving lives by notes we play on the guitar. And honestly, I've had people share some very deeply moving things to me about, when I thought I was playing badly. I don't know if this has happened.
yeah, yeah,
They walk up and say, from the first note you played, and my instinct in the old days was to go, oh man, I couldn't have been me. I sounded terrible tonight. And it was Bob Cranshaw, that said to
sure.
me that don't ever make somebody feel badly for complimenting you, you know.
That's yeah.
Um,
Huh, that's well put. Yeah, and sometimes we don't even realize, like, because I'm not a guitar technician in the same way that you are, but I play a solo weekly gig, and it seems it's a restaurant thing, and for the most part, you're musical wallpaper, or at least you think you are, and you think you're not connecting with people, and then at the end they come up to you and they go, that they like recall moments from what you're playing, and that song made me emotional, or it reminded me of my husband who passed or something, and you're like, I had no idea that this person was even listening, so you
well,
even
I know you're supposed to be the one asking questions, but can I ask you a question? How does that make you feel when somebody says that to you?
makes me feel great, man. I mean,
It's awesome, isn't it?
yeah, it makes me feel it's somewhat justifying for because sometimes we do feel ignored. um so it's and confirming,
Is that a Friday night gig that you do, is it?
so through the summer it's Thursday, but then it goes back to Friday.
Oh man, are you there this Thursday?
I'm gonna be there this it goes back to Friday now.
Friday, okay. For September, I'll be Friday and Saturday, um, somewhere else. But I got to go and uh, I got to catch you on your gig, so I go in and have dinner. And see, the thing is, I've learned now. I understand what George heard in me. I wasn't him. I was somebody else.
Right.
And so I get I want to go out and hear Doug Clark a lot more, and one of the great local guitar players. And I want to hear you and Joe Ack and all the. But to hear when somebody's playing solo guitar, I'm not sitting there assessing it. I'm proud to be able to go and be entertained and listen. So I'm gonna, assuming that you go through the winter. Our gig is weather dependent. This Friday and Saturday at the Butcher Block thing.
Oh,
It's an
sure.
outdoor.
Yeah.
So if it rains, we're off. But I'd love to, because I heard you playing bass. I haven't heard you playing guitar, and I'd love to hear you doing your thing. And
I'll be completely candid. My bass playing is more my strength. But I feel like I figured out a way to play the guitar that suits me,
but your bass playing's probably putting a twist on your guitar playing. Now I know you'll never see him do this on the gig, but Peter Washington plays. He's a big fan of guitar, and he plays. You know, he's another one who's so between him and Lewis Nash, their friendship is being and Jeremy Pelt, who I wrote for
Sure.
as well. But Peter's love of the guitar is if I brought a guitar that he hadn't seen before or something, you know, he'd be on your wall right now.
I know.
Uh,
Well, a lot of us bass players I don't want to say failed guitar players, but people who shifted to the bass from playing the guitar. But
I do wonder, like I think about it's going to shape, you're going to do something on the guitar that somebody playing guitar all the time. Well, you think about me playing bass lines, the guitar. I've played with some great bass players and I'm trying to mimic some things, but it's always a percentage of what a bass player is going to do. But there are relationships like a bass player playing guitar fascinate me. The amount of arrangers that were trombone players.
yeah, it's true. Hmm.
What is it about sitting in the trombone section that made them, it's probably something like an alto in a choir, a really good alto has to have very strong independent pitch.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because I always kind of thought like it was almost out of necessity because trombone players very often, in a small group setting are not always considered. Maybe it's lack of opportunity that made them want to arrange as well. But maybe it's just something about that instrument. I don't really know. It's interesting that you say that.
Well, Nelson Riddle was one, Billy Byers, Billy May was a trumpet player. Who's
JJ Johnson was quite
Bob
a
Brookmeyer? Who else did you say?
I think JJ Johnson was quite a
JJ Johnson. JJ Johnson's relationship with, I have somebody leaked a video to me of him in the studio with Robert Farnon, who's alongside Nelson Riddle, my arranging heroes.
Mm.
Um, and J.J. Johnson says, when I heard this man score for Horatio Hornblower, Captain, that movie with Gregory Peck, it made me want to. That's what got him writing for orchestra in Hollywood. And in a very human moment, he turned. It's a British orchestra there, and Louis Stewart was on guitar actually for that session, and he looks out at everyone. He lowers his voice. He says, "In a matter of fact, I'm completely intimidated by his presence." JJ says, and you
Yeah,
see Farnan swatting him away.
right. And that goes back to that imposter syndrome kind of situation. I mean, everyone has a hero or someone they look up to, and that's cool. And yeah, like I said, we've talked a long time. So the one thing I didn't touch
Before we
upon,
cut off, sorry, could I just mention something that I'd be remiss to do it,
sure.
especially that we got into very recently, and it happened really not long after Russell Malone passed.
Okay.
I ran into Alina Bloomgarden, who's the founder of Jazz at Lincoln Center with Winter Marsalis. I ran into her at a wedding I was playing solo guitar at. This is an example of what you were talking about in the restaurant.
Yeah.
I was hired to play, and I saw this lady who I thought was the justice of the peace, or was she a rabbi, or, because she was there early. And as the day progressed, I began to see that she knew a lot of the standards and the obscure ones and was reacting to things. And long story short, she asked me if I knew Russell Malone, and she told me Russell had just passed, and I had spoken to him a week before, as he tended to call a lot of people. He was great about reaching out and keeping in touch with the community, and um, but we talked about him for a while, and she told me he'd played some concerts for her in Rikers Island because she had this organization called Music on the Inside. And she asked me would I speak about him. And I remember saying to her, you know, I can, but what the story I just told you, you could find 200 guitar players that'll tell you the same story. And she said, well, would you say that? You know, and I could see that. Long story short, the date gets changed for that gala, and I end up playing a more pivotal role. Now I'm playing at it. And
Oh, wow.
cut to the present, I'm running what they call the re-entry band with Alina. I suppose, the music director of it, and it's formerly incarcerated people who got, in some cases, began music education behind bars. In other cases, were already musicians who, and to see people building their lives up, it's yet another thing that has reminded me. You know, I'm 65 now, and you'd think your big lessons have been learned, but uh, I come on. Here's the big one for me was I'm beginning to learn what the gift of music really is. It's what you can bring to other people. It's not me or mine or
Right, right. Yeah.
that's a big eye-opening thing for me to understand that that's really what it is.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very well put. And I think sometimes we're so into our own thing that it's hard to know that, you know. And then that goes back to sort of my guitar, the way I play guitar, um, towards like for a real technician like yourself or Doug, who you mentioned, who subs that gig for me all the time. Um, I think I play in a way that connects with people, even if it's not the most technical. I know my limitations on the guitar, and I think in some ways that's my strength when I play it. I know what I can and can't do, and I like to reach and try things for sure. And on a gig like that, it's 3 hours long every week. You can do, you could do
Yeah.
whatever you want. And I've been there 20 years. I'd have to do something really wrong for them to get rid of me at this point. Uh,
You know what? And that's a great run. I in 83, 82 to 83, I got a gig once a week in an Irish bar that's still there in Dover,
Mhm.
New Jersey, called the Quiet Man because I was living near, and it was playing solo guitar. And I remember Bucky asking me, "Have you got any gigs?" And I told him about this one, and I was complaining about it. You know, I'm thinking, um, what do you call it? How am I going to do this? 'Cause in those days you'd say, "How many chord melodies do you know?" I probably
Right.
knew about two. And Bucky's reaction was great. And I'm going, really? And I remember saying to him, why would you say that? And he goes, and he looked at me with kind of, because you're going to get your chops together.
Yeah.
And you know what? I don't know if you've done things like this where somebody would request a song and I could play the note in single note melody.
Mhm.
So if it was a song that was in E flat, let's say for argument's sake, um, uh, There Will Never Be Another You that people often play in E flat. I
Sure.
would start it in D with the pedal fifth bass ringing, and that would rest my two of my fingers
Mhm.
while in a way,
But
and then I'd move up. The big finale was transposing into chord melody in E flat.
right.
And I began stuff that I did on that gig, I do to this day. So I wonder, 20 years of playing solo guitar once a week, have you come up with tricks there that people say, where did you develop this style from?
I should qualify it a little bit. So, I used to do all just no tracks, no nothing, just solo. Now I use a looper for a lot of stuff. But
Oh, okay. I forgot about loopers
yeah,
aren't kind of,
I
there's a
I
skill to that too.
yeah, I purposefully don't do I try to do it differently every time. And if I mess up on the looper, it's almost kind of more fun to figure out how to how to get out of it. So, um but yes, when I was playing purely just one guitar and nothing else. Yeah, it's all true, sure. If you come into trick, plus it's long, it's hard to do. But I have this very simple way, like if someone asks me to play a song I don't really know, and this is where the bass player thing comes in. I very often will just like have the bass note and the melody note, and really break like because that's how I hear.
Right.
I hear bass and melody and those inner voicings I love, but they're almost not the thing that I first gravitate towards. which is the arranger thing. So more and more now, I'm starting to work more on chord voicings and things. But yeah, I think it's just a matter of who you are. I don't even know how to explain it, but I hear things in a bass context, and even singing harmonies has always been a challenge for me because I always hear the lower and the higher voice. That's the way my ear works.
Yeah, I don't, I marvel at how people just automatically put harmonies to it. I got two in my family here, uh, Chloe, my daughter, and our mom. They can harmonize at will, it seems. And I don't I don't know how they do it, but I can do it on certain easy, low-hanging fruit songs that But I don't know if you. I don't want to keep you all day, but did you see the whole Get Back? Did you go through that whole documentary with the Beatles?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm.
I went around that a few times to see at one point when they're doing songs that we would hear come out later on in George Harrison's All Things Must Pass, to hear them trying it out and they're harmonizing these on the fly responses.
Hmm.
All I could think of was all those years in Hamburg. It's the same kind of equivalent to your gig in Belmar and mine in Dover that time, that they came up with things that would become tools that they use for the rest of their lives,
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, and a lot of what they did and what I have to do on a much smaller scale is you have to keep it's entertain you are still in the entertainment business. So I know that people hear melody. That's what everyone can connect to melody. Um, and that's kind of what I try to present. And I think that's why it works. But I don't know. Again, I think it's somewhat working within your role. And again, guitar, I don't spend the same energy on guitar as I do on the bass. I don't know. It was very much. It started out as a duo gig. I'll just give you this is
Right?
this is how things happen, I guess, sometimes for a reason. A duo gig where they couldn't pay for two people, and they said, "Oh yeah, we know you teach guitar because I have the music studio. Would you just do it yourself on guitar?" And I probably should have done the thing that you did with Cassandra Wilson and said, really, I'm not the guy for that. But I stupidly or maybe wisely said, yeah, sure, I could figure that out. I could do that. And I had some classical guitar training. So first I'm just playing classical finger pick style stuff and it's slowly working it out. And it's taken a while to do it. But yeah, sometimes you just get into these musical situations and you just figure a way to do it, and that's kind of what happened with that.
Well, it sounds like you've had 20 years of proving me wrong.
Uh, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
And you know what? Yeah, it adds up after that amount of time when you think about it, sure. And the beauty of that particular one is that if I have a gig, I would prefer to play with people, to be honest. So if I have a gig in which I could play with other people, which often happens, there's so many fine guitarists like yourself and you had mentioned Doug and Joe who are also do that gig often, that they're very happy to do it when I'm not available, and they're okay with that. That's the great part. The last thing I do want to get into really quickly, though, just if you can mention, I know you do a lot with youth groups, which is so important. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've spent many years to James Polsky, the founder of Jazz Standard. I was playing upstairs in before it became Blue Smoke, it was 27 Standard was the name of it. It was a fine dining restaurant and it was a huge palatial room with kind of cathedral ceilings. It was
Yeah.
I started out playing solo guitar there, and then as I began to realize people were coming to see me play, even on solo guitar. It was amazing. They were calling up asking for me by name, which was the first time that ever happened.
Mm.
James then said, "All right, we're going to get seriously into this. Do you want to do a trio Monday through Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday make it a quartet?" Which was David Lee Jones. And Dave Mason was the drummer, a friend of mine from Ireland, a young drummer who's still here. And Thaddeus Expose, you might know, was the bass player, lives in Jersey. So I had that gig for a number of years, but he told me just as I decided I was going to stop teaching since I had this gig and roll the dice that I was now playing. I happened to mention it to him, and he goes, "Oh, I was thinking of asking you to take over our education program." And it was kind of like The Godfather 3, just as I'm about to get out, they're pulling me
Yeah,
back in. Or they were, and initially it was just bringing people in to hear a band that I would hire to do a Q&A and a 45-minute performance with questions. And then somewhere along the way, James decided, what about putting together a band? And when they reopened Jazz Standard and playing a gig. So that became the program. And I figured that the best way to approach it was like a playground. The kids get enough classroom activity. And I became aware that they were doing spring concerts in school and
mm,
fall concerts and sometimes nothing in between.
sure.
I know it's gotten better now, but in those days it was not uncommon, even with LaGuardia and schools like that. So I figured, what if they had a steady gig and we put the emphasis on performing? And that's the way we ran it. And all of a sudden, it was people were developing very quickly on the gig, like our alumni. And I want to be very careful and say I don't claim credit that I made these guys who they are. I'm part of the story, which I'm proud to be. But there are teachers behind the scenes working with them and either in their schools. But I guess over years you know, the evidence is there that what we were doing was working. And I think there's also the kindness I've been shown by people. I feel like I have a lot of paying forward to do. So I try to approach that. You had one of my students recently interviewed Morel Hidalgo, but it would be morally bankrupt of me to try and claim that I'm responsible for what people, I'm giving them some arranging stuff. I'm teaching him some intros and endings and
Sure.
how to do stuff like that, and he's soaking up stuff like a sponge. There's a young kid living near me, Andrew Aboud, who's a young blues guitar player. I'd put him on a gig with me, and then sometimes it's just, I suppose, my approach to those programs that I've run is we're not a classroom, we're not teaching. Here's a 251. We're more like Formula One, where you get a puncture in the middle of the race. They don't change your oil. They don't have time. They just fix the tire, get you back in.
Right,
And I'll come along and say to somebody, you played a natural fifth every time over that minor seven flat five, and you emphasize it. Was that intentional? Just in
right. Okay.
case it was. And they'd say, no, I don't know what to do with that chord. Can you help me?
Mm,
And now whatever you show them is going to register because it's case specific. And I think through the years, I don't have a methodology to teaching. I kind of um, sometime off record, I'd love to talk to you about that, because you do a lot of teaching too. I'm very affected by if a student's very motivated, the direction their lessons go are based on what they want to do. And
Yeah.
it could come from so many angles. But I do see a connection that on the negative side, uh, as education has played a bigger role, it's almost like a prescription from a doctor. They're only taking the pills the doctor told them to take. They're only listening to what they were told to listen to. And then you've got the kids that found out on YouTube. I see kids coming in 14 years of age trying to play like Lester Young.
Yeah.
And did your dad, was he a fan? No, no, I heard it on YouTube. So that's the positive of it.
Right,
They're
right.
finding the music. I find it strange when somebody has to be told to, don't just use the real book. Go listen to Monk playing his own tune. Find as
Yeah.
many versions of it. That actor thing, research your role,
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
Yeah, it's great, man. Cool. I mean, great conversation, Dave. It's really great to get to know you a little bit better. And once again, I appreciate you supporting the program and just being so kind. Um, any way you want people to be able to find you, or any website that you could direct people to if they want to study with you or hire you for anything?
I suppose I'm only starting to get my you know what together on this again. I haven't pushed my own career in decades, and so I let my website go for a while, but I'll probably try and bring something back. But for now, somebody's on Facebook, and apparently I'm on Instagram. Somehow it's loading whatever I put on Facebook, and I'm beginning to get
Yeah.
messages from that. But I can be found there, and I will always reply if somebody reaches out to me. You
Okay.
know,
All right. Excellent, man. Well, listen, enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend. Uh,
yeah. And thank you
yeah.
so much for taking the time for this, and uh, same as you, I enjoyed getting to know you a bit better, and I'm. Your book is going to play a very important role for me because I commute once a week to at least twice a week actually to New York, and the time there is my chance to catch up. So I will be reading. Start
Oh,
the
cool.
semester starts now. I'll be going into Church Street on Mondays and in Tribeca, and I'll be reading the book on the way there and the way home.
Excellent. Oh, great. Let me know what you think.
I know I'm going to love it because look, the subject matter and the amount of time and research that I know you put into it from talking to you about it, and it's over what, several decades, really, isn't it? That
Yeah.
oh,
It's been the greater part of my life doing that book. So I'm glad that it's at least available to people finally, because the book I'm discussing is Ray Brown, his life and his music, and it's just a lot of parallels to his life and the way you described a lot of the things. Um, and I think just a great figure for somebody who wants to know what it really means to be a professional music, and it's particularly in the jazz business. And I obviously a labor of love. So thank you.
no, I definitely look forward to reading it, and I'll get back to you when I've because I know I'm going to find stuff in there I didn't know about him. That's and we think we all know because we heard him playing so much with this person, and then there's the married twice to the same lady, to Ella, and you know,
Yeah.
uh, but there's so much more, you know, to be found out, I guess, right? And you
Yeah.
found it out.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoy it, man.
Thanks so much, Jay.
All right. We'll speak soon.
All
Thanks,
right,
Dave.
take care. Bye.